Sorry about that pause. We had a bit of a technical difficulty you had to fix. Okay, so we're in our final segment this morning. And it's one thing to look at the issues that seem to affect our lives in a day in and day out basis. But I think one of the things that we seem to be missing is the insight and the idea and the concerns that our founders had expressed to us, where they warned us very, very long ago about what we could expect if we continued down our path of apathy. You know, and I'm gonna give you a bunch of quotes this morning because I think these matter, and I think they're indicative of where we are. But we've kind of allowed our nation to descend to this point, and it's not because these people have in politics have done something that we shouldn't have expected. They've done exactly what we should have expected, because if we'd been listening to what our founders said to us, they made it very clear. I mean, Daniel Webster said to us, "Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may not happen again. Hold on to the Constitution, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world." Listen to that. He's acknowledging, first of all, that what has happened here with our Constitution and our Republican democracy form of government is a miracle that hasn't ever happened before in all the known universe. In all the annals of recorded history, no other nation has ever outlined the rules and the principles upon which this country was founded and built. That the government is not the master, but subservient to the people. That your individual rights are a prohibition against government's growth and natural progressive growth towards tyranny. Nowhere else in known history has any other nation. I mean, look, every nation, including China and Russia and Stalinist Russia and Germany's Hitler's Germany, the Weimar Republic before him, they all had constitutions, and they all listed human rights and the rights of citizens prominently in those documents. But at the same point in time, they left holes, loopholes, big enough to drive a truck through. Or they completely ignored them. And the end result is historical. Where we are today is the same scenario. We have the prohibitions in our Constitution, but it will not defend itself. The Constitution is only a piece of paper. Either we will defend it, we will force government to be accountable to it, and we will follow Jefferson's admonition that let's not pretend that, that ethics or our desire to believe our politicians is going to be enough to constrain them, or that their own moral boundaries will constrain them. Because human nature has proven to us time and time again that does not matter. That when it really comes down to it, people are corruptible, and the power and the money and the influence is what does it. But instead, let us draw a constitution that will bind men down with the chains of that constitution. The Constitution is not a positive document, it's a negative document. It doesn't grant powers, it outlines the prohibitive negative powers that are in limited delegation to a government. But you'll notice that it consistently says over and over and over, and the remainder are reserved to the people. Webster also said to us that there is no nation on earth powerful enough to accomplish our overthrow. Our destruction, should it come at all, will be from another quarter, from the inattention of the people to the concerns of their government, from their carelessness and negligence. I must confess that I do apprehend some danger. I fear that they may place too implicit a confidence in their public servants and fail properly to scrutinize their conduct. That in this way, they may be made the dupes of designing men and become the instruments of their own undoing. Now, Webster was not one of the typical founders, but he certainly was influential in the overall concept of America and the birth and maturity of the principles of self-governance, self-reliance, independence, liberty and freedom, and the rules that state that man's basic foundational human rights are protected because they've been given to us not by some constitution, not by some government, but by God and nature and natural law. That your right to free speech and your right to redress your grievance with your government, that your right to worship in the way that you choose, that your right to have to defend your home and your family, that your right to defend your state and your nation are inherent, that your right to not be harassed and searched, that your right to not have to go out and make a statement against your own best interest, your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and that your right to a jury trial by your peers are all held sacred. And that those rights were not given to you by government. They weren't given to us by the founders nor the Constitution. These rights are inherent to every man, whether they live in the United States or they live in Madagascar. The only difference is we outlined what they were in writing, and for the first time a government said, we're going to make those rights protected in a way that they cannot be touched, that they are sacred, that they are sanctioned and set aside. Yet every day we see our nation being undercut, being eliminated, being sliced and diced, that those rights are being slowly but surely stolen from us. And we acquiesce out of fear and carelessness and apathy and inattention, negligence. Our destruction is being brought upon us by ourselves. You know, I did an episode, I guess it was last week, or earlier this week, where I talked about the issue of shouldn't the military step in and remove this administration from power? I get that email from people all the time. But the truth of the matter is, one, our Constitution prohibits that. And so we can't go against what we know to be the one document that we believe strongly outlines and is the rule of law and the foundation of our entire society and government. We can't, like the progressive ilk do, apply the Machiavellian concept of the ends justify the means. They don't. So we can't subvert the Constitution in an effort to try to preserve it, because you cannot get good from doing evil. The truth is, we've made this bed. We've allowed it to get to this point. And it is our obligation, it's our job, it's our duty to step up and correct it. Not expect some military to step in and accomplish a coup that we don't have the courage ourselves to accomplish through either the ballot box or in the electoral process, or through the process of utilizing a convention of the states as outlined for us in the Fifth Amendment, in the Article 5 in the Constitution that says that if we can't get Congress to acquiesce to our demands, that we simply go and do it ourselves by the states. If Congress has become so corrupted that it has become tyrannical, the American population still has one resolve left before it has to decide to punt to the Second Amendment. And that is that we can go in and take the Constitution and modify it ourselves and strengthen it if necessary against tyranny. A balanced budget. That we have we put a stipulation in that our debt must be eliminated at all costs, irrespective of how much the cost is. That everyone has to tighten their belt. That these senators and these congressmen are term limited so that they don't become political royalty and monarchs and dukes and duchesses and ladies. That's what they've become. But those things are our responsibility. You can't expect the military to step in here and accomplish the coup for you because we don't have the courage to do it ourselves and then say, okay, now we've taken them out of power, we're going to give the whole mess back to you. Back to whom? The same self-people that literally allowed it to get to this point in the first place? What makes you think the next group in is going to be any better than the last group? And how are you going to prohibit the next group being even made up of more of the liberal ilk, which seems to have so much power and strength and influence in this country, than the group that you would like to see, the constitutional conservative group? You see, the truth of the matter is, America is either going to step up to the plate and they're going to do this themselves, or it's going to get to the point where we're going to have to take the matter and handle it through one of two methods. Either the massive civil disobedient method, where America finally gets to the point where we say, like they did in the 1930s when they went to Washington and stormed there and said, listen, the Depression is on. We need that money that you promised us from World War I. And what happened to them? That kind of massive civil disobedience can't be 10,000, can't be 20,000, can't be 100,000, can't be 1 million. It's got to be 25 million. We'd have to empty the countryside out. We've refused to do it by the electoral process. And we've refused to make the electoral process solid and sound. It's not who votes, it's who counts the votes, folks. And look at the people counting the votes. You've allowed technology to become your enemy in this regard. Well, it's easy to program an electoral ballot machine to say whatever you want it to say. You don't really put that above their abilities and or intentions or willingness to accomplish that, right? I mean, Machiavelli wrote in the concept of the ends justify the means, and that is essentially the mantra that they live by. Whatever it takes to build that utopian fantasy that they have. I don't know what's in it for them. I don't get it. I don't know why average Americans would be willing to capitulate to that and fall prey to it, but they do. And rather than sit around and try to determine how they became that, how they were willing to be fooled or tricked into believing that that was the case, we don't have the time for that. The truth is, it is the reality. So we should deal with the reality that's there and determine how we're going to move forward. I know people are afraid. I know they're scared. I know that you're afraid of what you're going to lose. But I got to tell you something. What you're going to lose, you're going to lose anyway if they win. George Washington made a statement about the Christmas that they dealt with in Valley Forge. The army was losing All the odds were against them. They were outmanned, outgunned, outfunded. And he said, to see men without clothes to cover their nakedness, without blankets to lie on, without shoes, by which their marches might be traced by the blood from their feet, and almost as often without provisions, marching through the frost and snow, and at Christmas taking up their winter quarters within a day's march of the enemy, without a house or a hut to cover them, and submitting to it without murmur, is a proof of patience and obedience, which in my opinion can scarcely be paralleled. He was stunned at the willingness of these men to sacrifice in ways that, folks, we're not doing. These men were without food, without shoes on their feet. They marched in bloody rags tied around their feet through snow. They were seeking something better. They were seeking freedom and liberty that they couldn't take for granted. In this country, we have forgotten that or never known the alternative. You know, you've heard the phrase, you can't miss what you ain't known. You can't miss what you haven't had. But you also can't know that which you haven't had. And we haven't had the level of desperation. Now, I have to tell you, it's not far from us. It's right around the corner. And when Americans come to realize the folly of their ways, the folly of their actions, or inaction, as the case may be, they're going to regret it. But then it may be too late for them to step up and say, I'm willing to fight now. Because we'll be like those soldiers with no resources, no food in our bellies, no shoes on our feet, fighting an enemy vastly superior in numbers and equipment. You know, one of the things I hear from the progressive left is all of this stuff that they're doing is meant to benefit us. It's all about human rights and equality. We're going to save those less fortunate than ourselves. We've been at this for 50 years, folks, and we haven't accomplished a doggone thing. The only thing that has been accomplished is that the rest of us, instead of rising them up to our level, have been brought down to theirs. We've reached the lowest common denominator, not raised them up. Why? Because we're going about it all the wrong way. There are always going to be those amongst us who do not want to work, do not want to play by rules, do not want to put forth effort, have no motivation, no drive, no ambition. I mean, Jesus told us that we would have the poor with us always. The fantasy that we can have everyone live in middle-class splendor is just not realistic. because there's plenty of people out there who don't want to do that. They don't want to work for it. And you cannot have a society that is full of people that are unwilling to basically get to the point where they take care of themselves, especially under this dependency mantra and indoctrination that we've been giving people for the last 50, 60 years. There is no independent thought anymore. There is no more independent drive. You know, I'm reminded of a quote from a guy by the name of H.L. Mencken. Some of his stuff is kind of esoteric, but this particular one is accurate, and it's as accurate as a hammer hitting a nail. The urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule. And I believe that really sums up and summarizes where we are today. These people who tell us that what they're doing is for the benefit of humanity are really, while they're at it, annexing in and usurping enormous amounts of power and money and influence. And like a snowball, it just grows and grows and grows. The urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule. How many people have you seen down throughout history who have had the urge to save humanity that didn't somehow or other benefit them? Daniel Webster also told us, good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of authority. The Constitution was made to guard against the dangers of good intentions. Say that to you again, and I want you to think about it for a minute. Good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of authority. The Constitution was made to guard against the dangers of good intention. Because good intention is the urge to save humanity, and it is almost always a false front for the urge to rule. You know, our founders told us and warned us over and over and over and over again. And we have failed to heed that warning. I'm reminded of people saying, well, the courts can step in and block, constitutional violations. And I got to tell you something. Thomas Jefferson told us multiple times in various ways, utilizing the same basic concept, that was never going to happen. In fact, he said to us, you seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions. A very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal. He said that in 1820. He also wrote a letter to a colleague in which he reiterated the thought in a different way, but basically the same phrasing. To consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a dangerous doctrine, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. That was a consistent thought throughout all of his writings. We know Congress is corrupt. We know the presidency is corrupt. And the judiciary is just as corrupt. But I think Americans, for whatever reason, have this feeling like they're going to be different. The truth is, America, that it is up to us to save this nation, if it is to be saved. I'll just leave you with this quick thought. When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another. and it will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Ladies and gentlemen, has not all power now become vested in D.C.? You're listening to America's Voice Now. Join us tomorrow morning for our last show for the week. Find us at americasvoicenow.org. We'll see you tomorrow.